Good morning, everyone. So I'll be kind of emceeing part of the day today. I wanted to kick off with a little Q&A session. How was yesterday for you? What big aha moments? Good day? Yeah. Excellent. What big aha moments like kept you up late at night thinking about robots or drones or biotech or the future of energy? Any comments from yesterday? Big aha moments? Yes, sir. The car. Okay. What about it? Yeah, just the obvious ones are parking lots, et cetera, but there's, I think somebody put up a blog post saying there's 128 job occupations that get fundamentally disrupted with the autonomous car. Valets, car wash people, all sorts of things, parking lot attendants, all of that starts to fundamentally change. One of the observations that I've heard Brad make, and we've seen a study saying that once we have a critical mass of those cars, about 20% penetration or more, we'll see an increase in traffic capacity between 10 to 15 times. And so we advise a big Canadian company who's 80% of their revenue comes from creating new roads. If you have 10 to 15 extra traffic capacity, time, not percent, what's the need for constructing new roads, right? Which has a pretty fundamental downstream ripple effect. My favorite statistic is a few years ago when some of us had BlackBerries, if anybody can remember that. There's a 3-day data outage and nobody could send BlackBerry text messages for 3 days. And the accident rate in Abu Dhabi during that 3-day period dropped 40%. And it basically shows you that fundamentally people should not be driving. We're terrible control systems for 2-ton cars moving at high speed. But enormous implications. The other statistic I remember, we talked yesterday about the 6 Ds and the demonetization and dematerialization that's going on. It turns out Manhattan today has about 13,000 taxis and 120,000 private cars. There was a study done by Columbia that showed that you could power the whole of the transportation of Manhattan with 9,000 autonomous cars. You'd have to wait an average 36 seconds. Right? So there you see the incredible oversupply that new business models will tap into. So because we don't need that many cars. And so we'll see some radical changes over time. We've got big fleet replacement. It'll take some time to get there, but it'll be quite an extraordinary impact on that. Okay? Great point. Any other comments from yesterday? How about energy? Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
In the poor people in Mexico will be able to have access to affordable energy.
Yeah.
They'll be able to heat their homes and cook their food without cutting down forests. So I think that, in terms of deforestation, et cetera, this is going to be a secondary effect of this incredible revolution in energy.
It will be, and we're incredibly excited about it. Of course, the $8 trillion of the energy industry globally, I'm not so happy about it, just in terms of the incredible deflationary impact there. But yeah, very true. I was on Canadian TV last year. I'm actually Canadian, originally from India. I spent 10 years in Europe restructuring large European organizations, mostly French ones, by the way, which is on bold. If I interact with French companies, that will make sense. And I went on Canadian TV and I said that the Athabasca oil sands will never be used. Right? Fracking in the short term, solar in the long term, they're done. And so incredible to see what they're doing. This is why Obama canceled the Keystone pipeline. There just will not be the future demand for things like that. And so huge implications, both positive and negative. The ripple effect, I mean, most of the most corrupt countries in the world are oil dependent and have made money off the kind of selling oil rights. And now that'll come home to roost. The Middle East will completely collapse. Right? The security agencies are really worried about Russia. The only asset is oil and gas. And when the value of that drops, they have a huge military and nowhere to go. Right? They're essentially practicing on the Ukraine. Their only option will be to invade Europe at that point. So what do we do then? And so there's going to be some interesting geopolitical implications of the energy crisis around all of this. But the impact on the bottom billion is profound. Right? A great market to watch is Australia. They allowed rooftop panels, and a couple of years ago, the utility in Australia had negative grid pricing at night, where they would pay you to take energy off the grid. Last summer, they hit negative grid pricing in the middle of the day, in the middle of the summer, which is not a great business model for a utility. right? And so that's not really sustainable. So how do we deal with that? Actually, last year I gave a talk to the CEOs of all the energy utilities here in the US, Con Ed, Florida Light and Power, et cetera, et cetera. Their first act a week later was to lobby the government to put a tax on solar. So you're like, shit, like, it's a big moral implication, right? Do we tell them, what should they do, et cetera? And so huge implications, they're both positive and negative. Other comments from yesterday? Yes, sir.
Solar energy becoming marketable now. It's real and it can solve our problems economically.
Economic problems, yeah. I mean, the distribution, if you look at just the big issues with terrorism, they're really worried about attacks on the grid. If you'd have a distributed grid, all of that concern disappears in a pretty interesting way. Right? Yeah, very possible, very interesting. What else? How about here? Yeah. Quantum computing. Scares the heck out of you, the polite Canadian word there. Very, very fascinating. I have a degree in theoretical physics, and we've had access to some of the top physicists in the world. If you ask them, where does all this computation come from? The current consensus is that we're doing that computation in parallel universes and bringing the answer back. And we're like, okay, that's it. I'm dropping the mic. We're done. I need a drink, etc. But very profound to see. I've spent some time up in Waterloo where they have the quantum computing labs. And they're doing kind of 3 breakdowns of that. They're saying, okay, can we harness the quantum computing phenomena long enough to do computation with it? Secondly, can you communicate with it and create communication networks? And then third, can you write software on it? Right? One of our companies called 1Qubit is actually creating algorithms for quantum computers now. And so that's happening today in the financial services. There's an obvious first step for that. But if essentially the way we think about that is we're heading to a world of infinite storage and infinite computation. Right? And then essentially starting from that paradigm, what does that mean for the world? But clearly Moore's law, if that happens, is blown out of the water in a positive way, and we just go kind of pretty crazy. And of course, then you have all of the encryption and security concerns around all of that. You heard yesterday from Mark Goodman, right? What a great name for a law enforcement official, Goodman. It's awesome. Okay, there was another comment here. You had the deflationary aspect around this.
Things that were discussed yesterday all have deflationary implications.
Very, very true. And we don't have an easy way of navigating that. Right? I'll talk a little bit more this afternoon about how we're seeing large organizations react, but it's pretty incredible to see what many large organizations are doing. And many times they're often not doing anything, doing stock buybacks to kind of prop up the share price. And over time that will kind of collapse and fail. But how do we deal with the deflationary aspects in all of these as we take the money out of the system? We saw what happened in the music business. You had kind of 8 major music studios. We digitized music, went completely from a material substrate to an information-based substrate. All the 8 disappeared, and you have 2 platforms left, right? iTunes and Spotify. We think that will happen in transportation. It'll probably happen in energy. But all of these markets where we have huge existing incumbents will essentially start to disappear. And we can see the pattern now in music. Our favorite framing for this, by the way, is photography. And the shift from the material substrate to the digital substrate in photography. Some of you are old enough to actually remember film photography. You're operating from a scarcity model. You can only carry so much film around. And when you go to the digital environment, the marginal costs go to 0 to taking more photographs. The domain explodes, right? We're now essentially holding the shutter button down on all of our devices. And then the third aspect is you shift the business model. In a scarcity problem space around photography, I might take courses in photography to kind of optimize every click. I learn about composition, I learn about the rule of thirds, etc. In an abundance problem space, we all have 8 copies of our photographs on 10 devices, and you can't find anything because it's buried in everything else. And when you shift the problem space, you shift the business model. And this is part of the reason we're seeing such disruption in these industries. The incumbents are all optimized towards this old problem space, and we're shifting from this material scarcity-based view of the world to this abundance digital-based view of the world. Very optimistic from the developing world, et cetera, but huge implications in other areas. You heard yesterday about the Tricorder X Prize, right? Incredible what will happen there. Rural areas where it's hard to get to a doctor, or in developing countries we have a doctor per million citizens, that device will be completely transformational. And again, nobody in the healthcare world knows that's happening. The winner will be announced at the end of the year, as we heard. We joke that the hypochondriacs will love that gadget, right? In fact, they'll buy 2 of them because one of them's got to be wrong. It'll be chaos for a while we figure that out. So pretty interesting there. Other comments, questions? Yes, ma'am. There's a mic coming right there.
Industry leaping disruptions. It's not just your competitors, it turns everybody into a competitor. That kept me up all night.
Yes, the fact that anybody can go into another industry. In fact, what's fascinating is today any entrepreneur can go into a legacy industry with a beginner's mind, leverage new technologies, and totally disrupt the status quo. Right? Elon Musk may be the best example of that. No experience in cars or energy or space, and yet market leaders in all of them. And we're seeing that across the board. Before, you had to have experience in that domain to do it. Financial services, healthcare is much more protected because of the regulatory aspects and the complexity around that. And so that will keep a kind of a firewall for a while around that, but not for that long. Right? It'll go to the developing world and then reverse back in is where we think it goes. Yes, sir.
As a whole range of jobs disappears through disruption, I think there's a universal agreement that one of the tools necessary to recreate jobs is skills and education. How and when do you think we'll see the deflationary effects of technology on education? We haven't seen it yet.
We haven't seen it yet. We think it'll be a while. We're not happy about it, but we think it'll be longer than we think, just because there's so much pressure and so much demand, especially for the top Ivy League schools and for the top tier universities. The reputational aspect of having gone there will last a long time. But it's starting to chip away at the bottom of the ice sheet is starting to melt in the education world. A great example is GitHub. How many of you are familiar with GitHub? GitHub is a platform where you can do social coding. And basically we found that when you do software development, doing it in pairs and collaborating with somebody while you're writing the software is a very powerful way of doing it. So they've created a whole platform where you can instant message back and forth, try things out. I can rate your code. You can give me a Yelp review, kind of review on my code. It's been so successful that your salary as a software developer in Silicon Valley today has no bearing anymore on the university you went to, the degree you got, or the grades you achieved. It's 100% bearing on what is your GitHub rating, which is an open meritocracy, transparent platform. And so the value of a computer science degree just went to 0 in terms of the need of the degree to get you a job. Right? We'll apply that to medical, healthcare, lawyers over time. And so we're going to see a huge issue around how we deal with this in these areas. But education, we've got a couple of very fundamental issues. Our education systems are really geared towards training up kids and gearing them up for the existing known jobs. We don't know what a job looks like in 5 years. What the hell are we teaching them? Right? That's problem one. And the second issue is that we do it in what John Hagel calls a push format. You get kids into a classroom and you're trying to cram algebra into them. Right? We haven't changed that model for a long time. We don't teach facts anymore because you can pull it down from Wikipedia whenever you want. We think that will happen in education, where you'll pull down a piece of learning for the task at hand. Right? You heard yesterday about our model at Singularity. We actually update our curriculum in real time. And we have an interesting problem. Even though we have the leading researchers, scientists, thought leaders in the world coming to teach, we can't become an official accredited state-sanctioned university, because to do that, you have to fix your curriculum and not change it. Right? So that's a bit of a problem. In fact, it gets worse. If you're doing today a master's degree in one of the topics you heard yesterday, advanced robotics or biotech or neuroscience, literally by the time you finish your master's degree, you're out of date. And we've just never seen that before. Our ability to teach a subject can't keep pace with the changes in the subject area. We saw that in web development, where kind of every year you have to update your skills pretty radically, but now that's happening across the board. And so we're going to need to re-architect that pretty fundamentally. I'll talk a little bit more about that this afternoon, but one of the big issues is that we can't update our existing education systems. It's too stuck in teachers' unions, textbook publishers, regulatory structures, And here in the US, Texas creationists that seem to decide what gets taught in textbooks. And so big issues there. You have to essentially create completely new systems on the edge and have that be the new gravity well over time. Things like the Khan Academy and other models. And we'll start to see that happen more and more where we do that. There's alt schools out of San Francisco, Brightworks. There's the Avenues schools. There's a whole set of new schools popping up. Well, little by little, we'll migrate to that model. But it's going to be a pretty ugly transition because the guild mentality sets in. In healthcare, was it 2 months ago that the state of Texas banned telemedicine? Right? They banned telemedicine in Texas a couple of months ago because you have to see a doctor to really have a visit. And some of the leading telemedicine companies are based out of Texas. They're kind of freaking out about this. And so we're going to have this huge battle around how do we deal with new capabilities and bring our old institutions up to date. And that may be the most fundamental issue facing us as a global civilization today. Our regulatory structures can't keep pace with this pace of change. Right? They always lag behind technology by definition, but that gap is growing very, very aggressively. In fact, I would argue that every single mechanism by which we run the world is out of date today. Our education systems, healthcare, intellectual property, civics, politics, legal systems, all designed for a world a few hundred years ago. We're actually going to need to re-architect it completely from the bottom up. Democracy. Let me be very provocative. A representative democracy does not work in the world that we're living into. We invented representative democracies when information was scarce. If you're in DC, you had no idea what was happening in California. The speed of a horse that was the fastest that information could travel. So you had a representative come and kind of represent the views. Now we have an abundance of information, and we can see that that model breaks down now. And so we're going to see this very big issue. In fact, if you look at every major democracy in the world, it's in massive crisis. India, Brazil, the US, we can see this playing out. It fundamentally breaks down. We're going to have to figure out what does a post-democratic future look like. And we don't have an easy answer for that. As Winston Churchill said, democracy is the worst form of government except for everything else. Right? And so we're going to have to navigate this in an interesting way. So with that, let's kick off on that optimistic note. I want to really stress that we tend to be very optimistic about the world. When you see the implications for the developing world around solar energy, we're lifting the bottom billion very, very quickly. We're not worried about the wage gap because we're much more interested in can we lift the bottom up, and we're seeing that aggressively happen with technology. And so we tend to be hugely optimistic about the world because of that. Ray Kurzweil often says that technology is a major driver of progress in the world, right? Maybe the only major driver that we've ever seen. And now we have a dozen technologies all doubling in their own price performance, each of them accelerating in its own right. But where they intersect, that adds a whole other multiplier to the equation. And so the aggregate effect is quite profound. In the 1500s, we had the Gutenberg moment, and the printing press changed everything. Today, it's like we've got 30 of those happening at the same time. And so it's going to put quite a lot of stress on our societal structures to see how do we absorb that pace of change. So let's kick off. I'm going to ask Will to come back on stage, but we're going to kick off on the democratization now of money and Bitcoin. So Will, come on back.
Awesome.
Thank you very much. I'll be back a bit later.